Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is continuing his pre-budget tour. Today, the stop was in Winnipeg to unveil the federal government's plan to tackle Canada's housing crisis. Sierra Bettens has the story.
At an apartment complex in Winnipeg, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced the upcoming budget will include $1.5 billion for a new Canada Rental Protection Fund to preserve and expand affordable housing.
Canada Rental Protection Fund will aim to mobilize investments and financing from the charitable sector, private sector, and other orders of government in order to maximize the ability to acquire and protect affordable housing.
The fund will provide $1 billion in loans and $470 million in contributions to nonprofits, charitable organizations, and other housing partners to build and preserve affordable rental units. Currently, less than 4% of the housing stock in Canada is social housing.
People are being priced out of their communities, and that's not okay. So we have to help nonprofits and community partners acquire units and preserve rents at a stable level.
Of course, it's not just cities feeling the housing crunch. In March, a report by Auditor General Karen Hogan found that the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation relied on outdated data from 2001 to determine funding for its regional offices. As a result, First Nations housing in the Prairie provinces was underfunded by $274 million. When asked whether the First Nations would be compensated, Prime Minister Trudeau did not directly answer the question.
We're going to continue to work with Indigenous communities right across the country to meet the tremendous housing needs that we know are faced by communities. That's why we stepped up significantly with billions of dollars in Indigenous, particularly First Nations and Métis housing, why we're going to continue to work to make sure that we're building those homes across the prairies and indeed across the country for Indigenous communities.
Sierra Bettens, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Still with federal politics, after 20 years, NDP MP Charlie Angus is calling it quits. Angus announcing today he will not run for re-election. According to a Facebook post, the honourable member for Timmins James Bay says it's time for family. Two other New Democrats have also decided not to run for re-election. They are Rachel Blaney from British Columbia and Carol Hughes, who represented an Ontario riding for the past 16 years. Angus was a staunch defender of First Nations interests, not only in his riding but across Canada. And he shined during question period, where his fiery demeanour meant taking on any cabinet minister who got in his way.
Will the minister stop nickel and diming the people of Treaty 9 and commit for all the communities properly funded fire halls, vehicles, and a new school for the children of Ibamtung, because every child deserves safety and a comfy school? The planet is on fire. Why is he letting the big oil lobby lead him around by the nose when he should be standing up for Canadians and standing up for the planet? There is no reconciliation in Canada without justice for St. Anne's. So will the minister stand up and tell us he will meet with the survivors and establish a credible mediation process? Look at me when I'm talking to you about these St. Anne survivors.
I think, judging by the tie, that was all just one question period. The Native Women's Association of Canada is in turmoil after announcing it was laying off half of its staff. NWAC blames the federal government for funding cutbacks that will see the budget there shrink from $48 million down to $10 million. But others are blaming leadership, workplace environment, and other factors for NWAC appearing to have lost its way. For more, we're joined by our weekly Truth and Politics panel. Jennifer Lewitz is a policy analyst with War Shield, and Egon Sinclair is a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press. With us, as always, Jennifer, we'll start with you this week. The Native Women's Association of Canada's funding's dropping from about $40 million to about $10 million. Quite a drop. NWAC blaming the feds, but we're hearing from insiders that it's perhaps the organization's leadership that might be to blame. Your thoughts on what's been unraveling here?
I think there could be multiple things playing into this. I think if the government has caught wind that there could be internal turmoil, that could be a potential for why funding was cut. I also think that we're going to see more cuts coming from the government as they try to get more onto a place of more fiscal responsibility. You know, we've been hearing rumors that the budget may see some cuts to Indigenous organizations and stuff like that. So I'm really not surprised to hear this.
Niga, NWAC, a really well-known organization, cutting half its staff as well. Do you think this will affect those who need a voice?
Well, undoubtedly. Just to add what Jennifer just said, the issue with most of these national organizations is that they're program delivery models. That's mostly where their funding comes from, is predominant delivering programs. They aren't governments. They are sort of oftentimes hands of the government, if anything, doing kind of focus groups, doing research projects, and so on. So I'm not surprised that if they have an infrastructure problem or strife within the organizations, battles with the organizations, that their program delivery would reduce and therefore their funding would reduce. The fact is, this is an organization that Ellen Gabriel has come out and said has lost its way. Going back to the 1970s, the Native Women's Association of Canada provided one of the most important and essential services to Indigenous women, because the fact is the Assembly of First Nation is mostly male-run, has been, continues in many ways to be, even though we now have a female national chief. There's an old boys club in Indigenous political networks, and the Native Women's Association filled in that gap. But if Ellen Gabriel has said this organization has lost its way, I certainly believe her.
Yeah, Jennifer, there's an online petition that's out there with hundreds of people who've signed their signatures to it, calling for the CEO to be removed from NWAC. Do you think it's time for a change at the top there?
I think if we're hearing about a lot of internal issues like this, it definitely goes back to the leadership and where it all starts at the top, especially when you are getting that amount of people saying that there is a problem. You know, there's obviously always multiple sides to every story, but I think leadership in roles like this is incredibly important, especially if you're going to say you're Indigenous led, whatever it might be. Having that good leadership at the top is so necessary, especially as it pertains to Indigenous people working in environments like this and making sure they're safe and they're heard and comfortable enough to stay.
Nigan, you know, the concerns over funding and where it was used for, things like that. Apparently an audit's going to be happening. Not long ago, we just had the audit announced for the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations. Thoughts on why we're seeing these now?
I'm always suspicious sometimes with audits, because oftentimes if we're talking about a general audit, they don't cover the kinds of issues or granular issues that are necessary to understand, and that's a forensic audit. So, I mean, the real issue is what does this audit look like? Will it be able to expose some of the major issues involving certainly the reduction of the work that NWAC has done over the period of time in which their current executive director has been involved? I mean, the other problem is that their expenditures have been brought into question. There's rumors of a large resort that the Native Women's Association owns and that has an indoor swimming pool. And I mean, I certainly haven't seen this structure, but if former employees are saying that money is being wasted and that big expenditures are being made at the cost of employees and programs, which is the whole point of the organization, and they're owning real estate that's worth millions of dollars. I mean, it certainly doesn't look good, and it certainly doesn't seem like it smells good either.
Rarely do this, but just quickly back to you, Jennifer. I guess what do you think there might be as an impact for those, you know, on the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls?
I think when organizations are not operating effectively, then the issues on the ground are not looked after the way that they should be, because everybody is internally at these organizations worried about the infighting, worried about getting that structure back. That is why it is so vital that these organizations are running, and they're running properly, so that the issues at the heart of why these organizations even start are getting the attention that they need and deserve.
Jennifer, Nigan, we'll have to leave it there, but always appreciate your time. Time for a quick break, but still to come, marking the 80th anniversary of D-Day.
20% of the regiment on D-Day were Indigenous, and the contributions of Indigenous veterans have really been overlooked for a long time.
Welcome back. This year marks the 80th anniversary of D-Day. And although the anniversary isn't until June 6th, the Royal Regina Rifles are unveiling a new statue that will be flown to Normandy to honor the sacrifices of soldiers who stormed the beaches that day. Rachel May has more on 2 public viewings of the statue in Saskatchewan.
The 8-foot bronze statue of a Regina rifleman will be on display in Regina on April 6th at the Legislative Building. The statue commemorates all those who fought with the regiment on D-Day. Royal Regina Rifles were in the first wave who stormed the beaches and with help from the Royal Canadian Artillery liberated the town of Bretteville, according to historical records. Kelsey Loney works with the Royal Regina Rifles Trust as a military historian.
20% of the regiment on D-Day were Indigenous, and the contributions of Indigenous veterans have really been overlooked for a long time.
Papixi's First Nation sent 40 soldiers to help not just on D-Day, but during the Second World War. The statue is set to make a stop on Papixi's in late April before being flown to France and being put in a memorial to the Regina Rifles Regiment in Bretteville.
We are so proud to include the Indigenous perspective on this story, and it's just an incredible piece of our provincial history that can promote reconciliation.
The statue is set to have its official unveiling in France on June 5th. Rachel May, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
It's a community that was recently in the news as several former leaders from Kitcisakik in Quebec came to Ottawa last month to allege a disorganized band office, which had burned down on February 21st. The community's lack of running water, electricity, and fire services contributed to the destruction. But because Kitcisakik is not officially recognized by Ottawa, it too often falls into a crack between federal and provincial jurisdictions. Shushan Bacon explains what that means to one particular Kitcisakik family, as read by Maricela Amador.
It's freezing cold out. For Edmond Brazeau, this is the first task to start the day. Keeping the wood stove going is important, especially in winter, because the food in the pantry can freeze. There is no hydro service in homes in Kitcisakik. However, some buildings have electricity, such as the health center. There is no running water either. Last month, the Kitcisakik Anishinaabeg Council building burned down.
Ça m'a fait de quoi? Ça m'a mis... ça m'a rendu triste parce que c'est tous des documents, c'est tous les équipements, les archives, les documents, les bâtisseurs, plein d'affaires de même que des choses de la communauté.
Now, it's a pile of ashes. Only one chimney remains standing. The continuing smoke is a sign of the recent tragedy.
D'après ce que j'ai entendu, là, ça va être remboursé par les assurances.
According to Brazeau, the fire was declared accidental, and the furnace was the cause. Indigenous Service Canada explained by email that Quebec has jurisdiction over Kitcisakik because it's Crown land. Spokesperson Caroline Graton added, the Government of Canada has been working for several years with the Algonquin of Kitcisakik and the Government of Quebec on a village creation project to address the issues of access to federal funding and support community development. However, Quebec's Minister of Public Security, François Bonnardel, also stated by email that the Kitcisakik community is the responsibility of Indigenous Service Canada for implementing emergency measures on its territory. According to Louise Quinton, Public Relations Officer of Quebec's Ministry of Public Security, it's the community that decides whether or not to set up a fire safety service. The choice is defined in particular according to its geographic and territorial reality. Despite these jurisdictional squabbles, the Kitcisakik family continues its ancestral way of life. The presence of beaver speaks to this fact. It's a protein that's part of the family's usual menu.
Okay.
With store-bought food, Adrienne Ajnishnapeo reads the label on the packages. Today, pasta is on the menu. To boil the pasta, the water comes from a kettle and the dishes are done on a gas stove. This family also has a propane shower system.
On le démarre ici. On le plat là, c'est ça qui fait ça fait partie de notre système.
Ouais.
Là, la chaleur va sortir de là, puis l'eau il va sortir. Parce que moi, ma fille, quand elle va à l'école, elle est obligée de prendre une douche. Puis on a un bloc sanitaire, mais c'est juste que c'est loin de marcher ça. Puis pour aller en char chaque matin, c'est fret des fois.
According to Brazo, there are about 5 families in the community who have this shower system in their home. Both members of the couple have held the position of community chief in the past. Adrienne Anishnapeo is the language and culture coordinator in Kitcisakik. The passing down of traditional knowledge is a very important value for her, but so is academic success for the youth in the community.
On sait que les conditions de vie ici sont pas faciles. Ils n'ont pas choisi de vivre comme ça. Parce que nous autres, ici, nos enfants doivent composer avec le fait qu'ils n'ont pas de douche dans la maison, il n'y a pas d'eau courante, ils n'ont pas d'électricité. On fonctionne tout avec une génératrice. Puis il y a des familles qui n'ont pas de génératrice.
Waseya Anishnapeo Brazo is in secondary 4. She travels more than an hour, morning and evening, to get to a school that has basic amenities like running water and power. And until electrical services become available in 2025, the only source of power is by generator. The Brazo family has to make sure they fill their generator every day. Then, for their water consumption, they will fill their buckets at the community's drinking water station. Chief Regis Ponsoe is aware that the lack of access to water does not make adequate fire service possible. For him, in the short term, it will be important to establish agreements with the fire departments of the La Vallée de l'Or RCM and the Lac-Simon community.
À l'heure actuelle, on n'a pas nécessairement de service en soi. Je pense qu'il y a maintenant, là, il faut regarder ces services-là de plus près, puis de regarder aussi quelles seront nos possibilités maintenant là, en établissant que ce soit mobile ou de façon permanente.
Alors bonsoir tout le monde, bienvenue à cette 520e séance ordinaire.
Val-d'Or Mayor Céline Brindamour says a team of firefighters made the decision to travel to Kitcisakik to put out the fire. And the decision was made in a gesture of mutual support, since the community is quite distant from Val-d'Or's fire safety service area.
C'est sûr qu'au moment où ils sont arrivés, parce qu'on ne se le cachera pas, hein, pour partir de Val-d'Or, se rendre sur la communauté, c'est entre 1h15 et 1h30. Alors, c'est assez long, là. Bon, ça n'a pas empêché, malheureusement, le bâtiment de brûler, mais je pense que M. Penesway a apprécié que le directeur puisse se rendre là, avec son équipe. Là.
Both Indigenous Service Canada and Quebec's Ministry of Public Security are open to discuss how to optimize a community fire safety service. Several questions remain unanswered for Edmond Brazo.
C'est ce que je me pose souvent la question, si le fédéral va-t-il nous donner un coup de main ou le provincial? C'est qui va nous donner un coup de main là-dessus? Parce que déjà là, on n'est même pas statut juridique encore. Là, aujourd'hui, le fédéral il nous oblige à avoir un statut. Là. Comment on va faire? Ça va dépendre de la politique. Qu'est-ce qu'ils vont faire avec ça? Là?
A report by Shushan Bacon, APTN National News, Kitcisakik, Quebec.
258 hockey teams are in Edmonton playing this week. We'll check in on the action after the break. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. And here's a behind-the-scenes shot by our very own Bill Scott. Bill's our camera operator. This was from this past weekend's broadcast of Hockey Night in Canada in Cree from APTN Studios. Thanks to Bill. The next broadcast and final broadcast of the season is April 13th. That'll see the Habs versus Ottawa. You can send those photos to share@aptn.ca for the chance to be our next featured photo. Let's take a look now at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, 4 in Halifax, snow, and 3 in Fredericton. Cloudy and -2 in Kuujjuaq. 3 below in Nain. 4 in Montreal and Val-d'Or. 5 above for Sault Ste. Marie. Flurries and 3 in North Bay. Sun's out and 7 for Thunder Bay. 8 above in Sioux Lookout. 7 for God's Lake and Thompson. 8 in Norway House. 11 in Winnipeg. 10 for Dauphin. 17 above in Regina. 13 in Saskatoon. 3 in Meadow Lake. 2 for Buffalo Narrows. In northern Alberta, 6 for High Level. 7 in Grand Prairie. +3 with snow in Edmonton. 0 and flurries in Lethbridge. Sun's out and 13 for Vancouver and Victoria. A sunny high of 8 in Prince George, 10 for Smithers. -3 in Old Crow, +3 with snow in Whitehorse. 0 in Yellowknife, 5 above and sunny in Wrigley. -10 in Sax Harbor, 4 below for Pawlatuck. -7 for Chesterfield and Arviette. 16 below in Resolute, -9 in Joe Haven. The Native Hockey Alberta Provincial Championships are ongoing in Edmonton at various arenas across the city. With competitive men's and women's games featuring ages under 7 to seniors, the event drew 258 teams from across the entire province. Competition, of course, is fierce. The 31-year-old championship runs until Sunday. Georgette Dion is a hockey mom from the Whitefish Lake First Nation.
I actually have 10 children, and all my children play somewhere all in this hockey tournament, from U21, U18, U13, like through the whole majority of these divisions. My children came to play hockey in this tournament since maybe 21 years.
Good for you, Georgette. You are a busy hockey mom. Time to head over to our Ottawa studio now, where Fraser Needham is standing by with a look at tonight's episode of Nation to Nation.
The First Nations Child and Family Caring Society is back in front of the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal this week. This time the organization is taking the federal government to task for not meeting its commitments on Jordan's Principle. Aaron Pete is a councillor of a First Nation in British Columbia. He says First Nations communities need to demand more of their elected leadership. As well, this week marks the 25th anniversary of Nunavut becoming a territory. The Premier says there are no shortage of things to celebrate. All this and more ahead, coming up after the news on Nation to Nation.
Thanks, Fraser. Looks good as always. You can watch Nation to Nation with Fraser Needham right here in less than 2 minutes' time. We're all out of time for your APTN National News for this Thursday. You can always find much more over on our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Merci Miigwech. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you back here tomorrow.